Hello there. Welcome back to Getting Started with C++ Programming. My name is Richard Snyder, and welcome to Section 6, which we're going to discuss about functions. In this section, we're going to take a look at defining functions and talk about their usage. We're going to demonstrate a function via code, and we're going to define the difference between pass-by-reference and pass-by-value, which is important in C++ programming when utilizing functions. First, let's define a function in this video. As I said, in this video, we're going to define a function and we're going to talk about its usage. What is a function? Very simply, a function is a code block that can be called or referenced when necessary throughout your program. So think about it with an if conditional statement or even a while conditional statement. Underneath each one of those particular statements in the code, you've seen a code block that can be executed that's encapsulated within the squiggly lines. A function, similar in concept, is essentially a code block that can be accessed by calling the function's name, and it can be called anywhere in an application. As an example of a rudimentary function or a function that every program must have, in the current code that we use, the main function is in the main block. However, you can design and implement your own functions that can be utilized in numerous different ways. So just because the main, which we put all of our code in it, has a huge volume of lines of code in it, that doesn't mean that they must remain there. We can break them out, put them into different functions and call them all over the place, which is very useful. Why use a function? Well, one, as I just said, you can break the program into smaller tasks to execute rather than one long piece of code. You've been seeing in the past, in our previous examples, everything that we've done in our code has been in the main function, and you've just seen lines and lines and lines as the application runs through each individual line until it reaches the completion of the return statement. Instead of doing that, if you had specific areas where you didn't necessarily want that to be all in your main function, you could break it out into a smaller task that can be run at any point in time in the application. Very handy. So you can reuse the function and code within it. The function can be called or used numerous times. So think about it this way. You can call a function anywhere in your program, 1, 2, 3, up to an infinite amount of times. So if you have a piece of code or task that you want to do that's going to be done more than one time, it's smart for you as the software engineer to do code reusability and not duplicate lines of code. By doing that, you break things out into a function. It makes things easier to just call it and utilize its application versus constantly copy and pasting the code over and over again. Functions are self-contained, so testing is easier. You can focus on testing the specific scope and application of the function. So your function is supposed to perform a particular task, something that is very small and finite. It's not supposed to be very complicated. Because of that, when you're doing testing, you can usually predict or know what the function is going to take input and how it's going to output. So you can test that piece of the code and focus on that. And once it's operational, you have pretty good faith that that piece of code is perfectly fine while you continue coding elsewhere. When you're testing other sections of the code, you know that this function is going to be operating perfectly fine. On the flip side, if something does go wrong, usually the debugger will tell you it's a particular function that's not working properly. That way you can focus efforts on that function, knowing that if for some reason it's outputting something incorrectly, you can take a look as to what it should take as input, how it should change or manipulate with the code, and what it should output. It really makes things easier with regard to testing and debugging. It's also easy to enhance or build upon your code with adding additional functions to increase capabilities. So if your application is like a first iteration, and you were able to create and do something really awesome and your client or user wants added functionality, it's not hard for you to go back into the code and create a new function and call it some other place in the main application so that it can create new tasks. It's also easy when you're working in groups that if one engineer is working on one function, the other engineer can work on another function and not trip up one another. It's a good way for design as well.